Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Automotive Fleet webinar, How AI-Powered Fraud Prevention Can Help Fleets Save Money, presented by WEX. I'm Shelley Mika, a contributing writer for Automotive Fleet, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. During the event, we encourage you to ask questions. We will try to get all of them addressed during the Q&A portion, but if we don't get to yours, don't worry. You will be contacted by email with a response after the event. So to submit a question, just put that in the chat and we will get to it toward the end of the webinar. So let's meet our speakers. Today, I'm joined by four powerhouse experts from WEX, Cecile Zinder, Will Fitzgerald, Sebastian Ramirez, and Frank Cerullo. Welcome to the Automotive Fleet webinar, everybody.
Thanks, Shelley. Great to be
Thank
here.
you.
Thanks, Shelley.
Yeah, so glad to have you here. So I want to just go around and say, what your role is with WEX and how you work with fleets. So Cecile, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, it's nice to be here. Cecile Zinder. I'm the Vice President over our Mobility Products Group. And so what that means is I get to talk to customers all day about their problems, build great solutions and experiences that help solve some of those problems, and I really love it.
Great. And let's go to you next, Will.
Will Fitzgerald, Vice President, Fraud and Financial Crimes with WEX. I lead exactly what it sounds like, our fraud and financial crimes team. So strategy, detection, and then all the operational components that go into supporting those functions.
Fantastic. Thank you. Seb, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so Sebastian here, super excited to be here. I'm the director for product on cards and payments. That means it's pretty much all card products. How do we go about acceptance, enhancing payments experiences, and how do we have a secure payments experiences for all our fleets? So super excited to be here.
Great, thanks. All right, last but not least, Frank.
Yeah, hi, Shelley. Thank you. So I've been at WEX 15 years. My responsibility is to work with the outside sales teams that pursue new business in the mid to large and the strategic spaces. So the group I have the pleasure of working with interact with customers every day, and I'm excited to share what we've learned.
Great, so glad to have you all here. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, I just want to talk about fraud. How big of a problem is this? We have some stats there on the slide that show this is, a significant problem for fleets. So tell me a little bit about these stats, and then are fleets more or less susceptible to fraud? Or are these numbers pretty much representative of most organizations?
Yeah, I'll start and then somebody else can jump in if they want. I don't know that susceptible is probably not the right word. We do see this kind of fraud, these kind of fraud statistics across multiple industries where we connect closely with other industries to understand what's happening. I think a few things drive what's happening in fraud specific in fleet. Fuel price, like so many other metrics in this business, drives a lot of what's happening with fraud. So if fuel prices are high, economic conditions are not great, organizations are under pressure, that can drive fuel fraud into the marketplace. It's essentially where the money is. So you think about all fraud is predicated on making money. So if a fraudster feels like they can perpetrate fraud and yield money because the fuel prices are so high, they're going to go after it. And so I think susceptible is not the right word, but certainly economic conditions can drive fraud into the fleet marketplace.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's zoom out a little bit. So what are some of the macro trends you're seeing with fleet fraud? Is it trending upward? And if so, why?
It is. I mean, you can't open a fraud podcast or article without the first line saying fraud is out of control. It is in every industry. I think a few things are contributing to that. Some stats from that, I think they're on that slide, really stand out to me. 80% of 80% of organizations in 2023, I think 2024, experienced a fraud attack. And so that speaks to velocity, like how active are fraudsters in the market space. And that's a lot. The contributing factor, one of the key contributing factors, and I know it's such a buzzword, I hate even saying it as much as I do, is AI. Ever since the advent of interface-based AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, things like that, where you can type a question and get robust responses, that's really unlocked capabilities for the fraudsters. The barrier to entry used to be, had to know how to get information, had to know how to use the information. You needed to be a native English speaker if it was perpetrated in the US. All of that's kind of gone. And so because of that, we're seeing the attack velocities double and triple over just the last few years. And so I think that's one of the key contributors to fraudsters operating in this market.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, so we're looking here at kind of the rate at which fleets experience fraud, but let's go on to the next slide and maybe dig into some of the numbers a little bit. So, it might amount to up to 5% of the fuel budget. And as we know, fuel budget, that line item is usually bigger than any of the others on the spreadsheet. So let's talk about some of these numbers and why fraud is so expensive.
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to take that, Shelley. So 5% is, like you said, that's a lot. And it's not even just the actual fraud loss that you have to worry about. It's also all of the operating costs associated with preventing and recovering from fraud. So you've got to monitor your drivers and employees to make sure they're complying with your spend and expense policy. You have to pay someone to pour through all those reports. If you see an issue, you've got to call the drivers. You've got to get them off the road. You've got to talk to them. So then you're starting to actually impact getting the job done. And you're thinking about revenue generation and all of that. And then worst case scenario, there's an issue. You have to fire someone. You've got to rehire someone. So you can see how the downstream implications are really material. And that's just for internal fraud. Then when you think about third-party fraud or external fraud, that's, as Will was talking about, those are like the real fraudsters. Recovering from that is lost capital, the legal fees, resources, and time spent on investigations. So you can imagine that those numbers can really, really rack up. I think that's why, fuel cards can be very effective, as Will was talking about. On our fuel cards, we see basically 1 in 12,000 transactions are fraudulent. So that's less than 0.01%. That can give you a tremendous amount of control and just really give you some of those strong fraud protections. But let me maybe paint the picture a little bit with some numbers. So we talked about 5% generally being what can be lost to fraud and misuse as a percentage of the company's total fuel spend. That obviously differs based on the business that you run. So if you're in transportation and logistics, fuel is going to be a much more significant percentage of your total expenses because you've got your vans out there, pickups, that's your business. If you're on in a trades business, think plumbing, electrical, general construction, it's going to be a smaller percentage, but it's still important. So needless to say, you really want to stay focused on that. I'll bring to life what 5% means. If you're a 1,000 vehicle fleet and you've got $5 million in annual fuel spend and a $10 million operating budget, if you're losing 5% of that to fraud and misuse, that's around $250,000 a year on your $5 million fuel spend, $250,000 a year. And what we generally see is that internal misuse will account for about 80% of that. So about 200,000 of that 250 could be your drivers misusing the card, doing unauthorized fill-ups. And then the other 20% is typically external fraud. Now, these are just directional. But again, we're going to hammer it today. It can really rack up. And then when you layer on all the maintenance, the operations, all like I said, those operational costs around that can be upwards of 20% of your total operating spend. So of course, the losses will vary by fleet size, by sector, by maturity, but needless to say, it is a risk, which is why we're excited to be here today to talk about some of the things you can do to prevent it.
Yeah, and I like how you explained how, something like an incidence of fraud can just spiral out of control and really like hike up the costs like you were talking about. And, for those of you in the audience, you can kind of plug in your own numbers here and think about what, 20% of your operating spend is and 5% of your fuel budget and see how these numbers apply to you. And I'm guessing everybody in the audience is wondering, okay, well, what do I do? What are the steps that I can take to recover from something like this? Can you tell us about that, Cecile?
Yeah, definitely, Shelley. Well, so let me go back. Let's go to that number, 5%. And let's say 80% of that is coming from your employees. So that's where you want to start. Set a really clear company spend and expense policy. Set it up front, communicate it to your employees, train your employees, and then focus on driving those behaviors, incentivizing those behaviors. That's the foundation. And that should help cover, a big chunk of it. But then from there, you will need more control. And you will certainly need more control to help prevent the third-party fraud. That's where we recommend fuel cards. They can actually help you set and enforce the limits up front. So I'll talk about the WEX cards. So with the WEX fuel cards, you can customize those spend controls. You can dictate how and when they are used. So you could place the limit on purchases. You could restrict your drivers to just purchase fuel, and that's it. All they can purchase is fuel and nothing else. You may have some employees or drivers that you want to enable to deal with vehicle repair or maintenance. You may have some that you want to enable to make transactions in the convenience store. You can set all of those limits. You can also control usage times. So if you're running Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, you can restrict the card to be active for fueling just during that time. So then you're preventing any sort of misuse around the weekends, early morning, late evening. You can also set spending limits. So you generally know how much you want to spend in fuel on a daily basis, week basis, transaction basis. You can set it there. You can manage the transaction frequency. You see where I'm going with this. There's a lot of customization depending on the kind of control you need. You can set that transaction frequency, total gallons. But we always recommend start with your company spend and expense policy. File your disputes on a timely basis, stay vigilant, but the controls with a fuel card really help prevent a lot of that as well. Will, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. On the third party front, and I think we'll probably get into this soon, recovery after a third party fraud attack is slightly different. So we're seeing a lot of account takeover. We're seeing a lot of phishing, a lot of social engineering, fraudsters attacking the human factor instead of the technology factor. It still happens. We still see skimming. We still see card compromises. That certainly still happens. And so especially in the event where you have ATOs, social engineering, things like that, the cyber fusion thing starts to come in, and like how is your cybersecurity posture aligned to your fraud posture? And so, did you change all your passwords, or is multi-factor authentication set up on all of your accounts? And that goes all the way down to business email. So business email compromises are a tremendous source of fraud right now. And so really reacquiring that security posture that you had before the attack and making sure all those walls are back up and all the doors are locked and the windows are locked, and getting back into that strong security posture. And then I think Cecile mentioned it, but it's so important to understand your spend and like review your transactions, make sure everything makes sense, and get them reported timely, because then that feedback loop, we process like 30 million transactions a month, I think. That feedback loop of just those few confirmed fraud helps us go retrain our models and teach the models where they were right, where they were wrong. And so that's a really critical part, getting that feedback back to us so we can stay on track there.
Well, and I love that you guys aren't like, yeah, we have, a 0.01, percent rate. It's like you're still going back and refining and refining. And I mean, that seems like it would be really comforting to people who use your fuel cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would
It
just
is,
even
yeah.
add to that, Shelley, every business is different, right? And so that's why we have to continue to train the models. That's why that feedback loop is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let's go to the next slide. I know, Will, you mentioned a few of these, but if we're talking about what's the enemy, we're looking at skimming, application fraud, business identity theft, first-party fraud, and account takeover. Will, can you tell us which types of fraud are most prevalent and why?
Yeah, and I mentioned this just a second ago. The human in the loop is really becoming a huge focus for fraudsters, and I think a couple of things are contributing to that. One, technology on the good guy side. As much as we talk about the bad guys using AI and cool technology, we are as well. Fraud prevention technology has come a tremendous distance just in the last few years. Those barriers cause fraudsters to rethink their approach. And what we're seeing is they are going back after the human factor. So, can I get on a phone and social engineer a call center agent, or could I get on the phone with one of your drivers or your fleet manager and apply pressure and techniques to get them to change passwords, change email addresses, give up credentials? We're seeing a heavy attack in that space. And I guess the dangerous part about that's different than transaction fraud is typically when somebody gets a card, they compromise a card some way, they go swipe and they can do damage that way, kind of one transaction at a time. And we have perimeters up so that can only typically balloon out so much and our systems detect it. When you talk about ATO, it's not necessarily always a takeover of your, say, WEX account. It could be way downstream at your personal email account that then they can use that information to engineer somebody that you have a relationship with and use that relationship to then get into your business email. And then now if I'm in your business email, just think about what's in your business email today, like the people you work with, how you interact with those people, words that you use, familiarity phrases, things like that. And so AI allows a bad actor to take all of that information and then create schemes to really go after people in a targeted way. We are seeing that manifest not only digitally. If you think about just a few years ago, I say the old days, and when I say the old days, I mean like 4 weeks ago now, because of the pace at which everything is changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just recently, you would get an email from the famous one that I always use is the Nigerian prince trying to escape his country. And I just need some money, right? And it was horribly worded, no punctuation, didn't make sense. Those days are gone. The emails that come across from fraudsters are highly effective. They look very professionally written. They duplicate logos and even language from emails very well. And so diligence on your user base, the people that have access to your accounts that work for you, that has to go up. So training, teaching employees what to look for. One of the big, when we do surveys and talk to employees that have been compromised by third parties like this, almost always they say, I thought I was going to lose my job. I was scared that I was going to get fired if I didn't do this thing. And so empowering employees and rewarding employees for saying, you know what, I need to call my boss. I'm not authorized to do that. Give me just a second. Text your boss, somebody you can confirm, go walk into their office and say, hey, is this legitimate? So empowering people to do that and taking that fear factor away goes a tremendous distance. And we also find that after about 6 months after a fraud training, the retention rate of the information is like single digits. And so you have to constantly keep this information in front of your employees and people who have access to your accounts. And then we also do, I bet everybody that's listening has a text in their phone right now from their bank that says, we'll never ask for your password. Don't ever click on a link. No, so those messages get diluted, but we have to keep them in market and just keep it constantly in front of folks so they remember there are bad guys out there and they're very good and very effective. And unfortunately, we have to be skeptical of so much these days. It's almost impossible to get people to click on a legitimate link now. When you want them to click on a link, they won't do it. And so,
Yeah.
just providing that information is critical.
Yeah, that social engineering can be so deceptive. It looks like it's an email from someone in your HR department or from finance asking you to confirm something. It's sort of one of those things where you click on it and then you realize, like in the horror movie, the call was coming from within the house and,
That's right.
damage
That's right.
is already rolling. So it's scary. Do you feel like the social engineering piece is what fleets should focus on preventing first, or is there something else that takes precedence over that? What's the first step?
Yeah, I think the card controls are so important. Cecile said it. She's probably going to say it 5 more times because it is important. The smaller we shrink the population of transactions that can be used for fraud, the better. But yeah, I think what I talk about at every conference that I attend, every chance I get to get in front of a customer is exactly that. Put controls on your cards to limit that, and then start talking to employees about clicking on links, giving out passwords, answering text, answering phones. That is the most compromises that we see. I think 80% of compromises started with a phishing email in 2024. And so it is the pathway that fraudsters are using to attack our customers and enterprises.
And I will add to what Will is saying. I love everything that Will has said and everybody has mentioned. Like one of the things like he was talking about social engineering, if you think about that's your front door. So like even if you have controls and they get into your WEX account, for example, your car provider account, they can override control. I think that's what Will was hammering so much about, like the social engineering, because once they're in your door, like they can control, they can pretty much override your controls, and the controls go out of they don't help for anything. And the crazy thing, like he was talking about, was like the urgency. Like I also work in front of my past life, and it's always about the emails or the calls or the texts. They always have a sense of urgency, because when you put somebody like you're gonna lose, like they said, like they thought they're gonna lose a job, that sense of urgency, people's like barriers go down, and they're like, oh, I don't want to lose my job, so I'm just gonna provide whatever you need so I don't lose my job. So just make your staff aware that that's the way they're gonna go through the door. The email, the text, and everything always, like 90% of the time, comes with some messaging that is creating that urgency, and people are like, I don't got time to call anybody, I just have to make the action. So like that's step one in my head.
Yeah, and it's sort of like how, Will, you were talking about there used to be grammatical errors and kind of telltale signs that it was a phishing scheme. And now that we don't have that, what is another telltale sign? And I think, Seb, you're absolutely right. It's that sense of urgency. If it seems overly urgent, that's something that will tip you off that it's not legitimate. And, Will, like you said, it never hurts to just confirm with your manager or the person who's asking you for the information to make sure it's them. So let's go to the next slide, because, we've talked about some of these inside and outside attacks. Phishing is an outside one, but there are plenty of ways that fraud happens inside an organization too. So, offering to fill a friend or family member's tank and take half of the fuel price for it, things like that. So, what do we feel like the bigger threat is? Is it that inside job or the outside attack?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look, they're both big threats. I think you're going to hear that from us today. As I mentioned earlier, when you think about that 5% that can be lost to fraud, what we generally see is that the majority of that is coming from internal misuse, internal theft, and internal fraud. It's all sort of the same thing. It's your employee is not complying with the expense and spend policy that you have set forth, and it's what a lot of fleet managers and business managers are thinking about and worrying about, because it has real bottom line impact. We're doing some interesting work. As I mentioned, Sebastian and I are in the products in the products team. So what we get to do is use technology to help make customers' lives easier, simpler, as much as we can. So we're doing some really interesting work with AI right now in an actionable insights beta that we have running. And essentially what we're doing is combing through all this data to try to understand where's this misuse coming from, and then training the models to be able to make recommendations to fleet managers. So we're really excited about it. We're getting great feedback. And what we're really seeing is that, as we suspected, majority of it is coming from irregular spending. And so what a regular spend means is I'm loading my vehicle with premium fuel instead of regular. Maybe I didn't know. Or maybe I thought, you know what, this will help me get further, and. So that's a big one, premium fuel. Also going into the store and getting what we call the Cokes and the smokes, the snacks and the cigarettes that weren't authorized, but you're already fueling up, so you might as well just go in and you extend that purchase a little bit. That's another sort of irregular spending area that we're seeing. So you can just imagine, once you start thinking about it, premium fuel or non-regular fuel, getting those unauthorized snacks can just be so pervasive. And then there's the other ones that what we've talked about where my friend needs me to fill up their truck, or it's the weekend and I want to fill up my personal vehicle. Or worst case scenario, I'm trying to resell the fuel so I can make some money on the side. All of these things can happen, which is why, one, like we've said, the spend policy, enforce the policy, but two, put those controls in the card. And what we're doing on our end is using as much technology as we can and as much incremental data from the vehicle to help prevent that at the point of purchase.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
so great because
those opportunities to you as well.
Yeah, it's great to point out that, a small thing like a purchase of a cup of coffee, that might seem like, okay, it's $1, right? But if multiple drivers are doing it and they're doing it every day of the week, those costs add up quickly. And, I think when we think about fraud, we're always thinking of these big malicious acts by either internal or external, but it can be something totally innocent where the driver doesn't even really know they're committing fraud. Like you said, like maybe I should put in premium. That's probably better for the car. I think I'm doing something good, or it's just a cup of coffee, no big deal, and they don't really think about the larger impacts. So, I think it's good to know it's not always this horrible thing. And sometimes employees really do think they're not doing anything wrong, but even those little instances can totally add up.
Along those lines, when you talk about adding up, there's I guess a theory on fraud, when people will commit fraud, and they have to have pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. And if someone has all three of those, the likelihood of them committing fraud is extremely high. Everybody. That dollar coffee, when they go, oh, it's just $1, I'm going to do it. That enables the second one. That's it's fine. I'm also going to get a 6-pack or a pack of sodas. And that enables the next one, and then the next one. And in a very short period of time, their rationalization has grown into a way that will allow them to commit any level of fraud. And so you have to catch it very early. Even if you're not going to fire somebody up over a cup of coffee, maybe you are, maybe you're not. You have to catch it early because it will balloon extremely quickly, just from a psychological perspective. Innocence to guilt is a very short leap in that space. That's
such a good point. Yeah, the slippery slope of it all. Makes catching it early so much more important. So speaking of catching things early, let's go on to the next slide. And, there's probably people in the audience who do use fuel cards, some who don't. But most people who've been in the industry for a while know that conventional fraud protection is, reviewing credit card statements. It's, not getting the most up-to-date information, but maybe reviewing charges that you're seeing that happened last month, and that's maybe too late sometimes. So tell me about, some real world examples of how conventional fraud can just fail fleets?
Hey, Shelley.
Think about
go ahead, Will.
No, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'd love to provide a couple of real life examples. I think we could start with the state of Georgia. Georgia's Office of Fleet Management oversees data collection, auditing, education, and guidance for fleet management functions throughout the state. They serve one of the largest government fleets in the country, supporting 160 agencies and managing over 20,000 vehicles. Prior to adopting WEX's fuel card program, the state was losing a lot of money annually due to fraudulent transactions. From the very beginning, in their pilot of WEX's fraud protection tools, they realized significant savings. This was dollars their conventional fraud protection practices had failed to detect. So from that point forward, the state of Georgia continues to use their technology and tools to spot trends, target costly driver behaviors, train employees, and keep the savings going. So that's a really real life example of a customer who's benefited from fraud protection. I'll give you another example of how conventional fraud protection is inferior to modern AI-powered fraud protection, and that's with Hammer Construction. They experienced prior to switching to WEX. Hammer Construction is a business servicing the oil and gas industry throughout Oklahoma and Texas. When we first met with them, the company was losing $500 to $700 a month due to theft. The conventional fraud protection practices were just not effective. One of their complexities of their businesses was that crews were out in the field for weeks at a time. They needed to tackle the losses they were experiencing through fuel card misuse during those long stretches. When they switched to the WEX fuel card as their provider, they were able to get control of the first party fraud that they were experiencing through WEX's dashboards. They could see when an exception occurred at any of their 225 fleet cards. As they were alerted, they could then quickly and easily drill down into a region, department, service station, location, vehicle, or employee to determine the root cause of the problem and address it. So there's just a couple of real life examples of where fleets have addressed a fraud problem with WEX's tools.
Yeah, I appreciate how you used both a government fleet example and a commercial fleet example. That, you know, that the latest tools can help fleets of all sizes, shapes, industries, because everybody's experiencing fraud. And one thing I also wanted to add here was just that conventional fraud protection, you know, you may be able to run some reports or gather some data on your fuel purchases, but going through all of that is such a heavy lift for fleet managers. And, you know, if you can take that off their plate, think of all the other things that they could be focusing on in a day. So I think this leads well into our next slide, which is, okay, what's the alternative to conventional fraud? And, you know, just with lots of other technology, AI and machine learning are, you know, here to help. So, Will, I think this is a good one for you. In the context of fraud prevention, are AI and machine learning fairly new, or are a lot of fleets already using this technology? And then maybe also, sorry to pile on here at you, but from a broad perspective, how would you characterize the difference between traditional fraud detection systems and then these AI or machine learning powered models?
Yeah, that's a good question. So is machine learning and AI, it's not new in the transaction monitoring space. We've had AI machine learning models to some degree in transaction monitoring for several years. The advent was on the consumer side. So if you think about pick whatever card you like to use in your wallet for your normal everyday purchases, groceries, you know, Xboxes, Apple iPods, whatever you're buying with your credit card. Those transaction models have existed for a while. And there's a couple of brands of them that are very popular and widely used. The problem is, why you don't see machine learning models in fleets until recently, is those models don't work on fleets. If you try to deploy that consumer purchasing model on a fleet card, it would it would not understand the spend and would think something was wrong very quickly, and you would end up with a bunch of declines. And so to really make a fleet specific machine learning model effective, you have to build it internally, which is what we did, WEX did. We run about 6 different models on our transaction environment. Those are pre-auth, post-auth, false positives. We have data models, we have real-time transaction models. And to speak, so that kind of speaks to, no, they're not new, but they're relatively new in the fleet specific space because they're proprietary. And I think one of the things that gives WEX a huge advantage there, and why we've been so effective with the models, is our transaction volume. What we know about transactions and our historical data just really allows us to build robust models that are highly accurate. How they're different, if I think about just a few years ago, again, way back in the old days, we had really binary transaction rules. So think about if-then statements. Think about a security guard at a bank. If a guy walks in with a ski mask, then stop him, right? Really binary. A, B, if this happens, do that. And you could stack those a little bit, but you really couldn't correlate across too many dimensions. What a machine learning model does is allows us to build dozens, hundreds, really even thousands of features. And those are characteristics of a transaction. So where is it? Where was the transaction? How long since the last transaction? How much was it? What type of fuel? What kind of station? Just all the things, just think about all the characteristics of a transaction. And then what the machine learning model allows us to do is correlate between all of those dimensions and features at the same time, and then create a probability score of fraud. And we know that that probability score of fraud is going to be effective at a certain degree. And so we can decline those transactions with high levels of confidence. The other thing that machine learning has enabled is those old binary transaction rules, like if-then statements. We can take that probability and give it to those binary rules and improve their efficacy. And the last thing I'll say about the transaction monitoring rules and kind of the more modern use of them, machine learning, is capture rate. When I think about, my team thinks about stopping fraud, it's how much fraud can we capture always, right? We want to capture as much fraud as possible, but there's always a cost to capturing fraud, because I don't know, we're never right 100% of the time. And so the cost to us, and more importantly to the drivers, is a false positive. There's nothing worse than a legitimate driver that's trying to get somewhere and swiping a card and getting a decline. And now they're either looking for another card, or maybe that's their only card, and now they're on the phone with a fleet manager or trying to get back on the road. And so we've been able to use that machine learning capability to increase our precision by about 30%. So that's 30% less false positives for drivers on the road. And then coupling that with an automation capability. So now, instead of having to call somebody, an email immediately goes out to a fleet manager and says, hey, this transaction was declined. Do you want to approve it? And they can adjudicate that live in our application or in our WEX online portal. Click a button, and within a few minutes, that driver's back on the road and fueling. And we even have SMS capabilities right around the corner. So if fleets want to send that directly to a driver, the driver can get that text and then go adjudicate that alert. So that keeps people on the road faster, and the false positives become less impactful to the fleet.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, maybe one of those kind of hidden costs of the false positives, is it prevents that productivity. Anytime you're keeping a driver off the road longer, that's less productive that they are. And so that cost even adds up in terms of, are you, late to service a customer or late to deliver something? And then you're having customer service impacts. And again, it just kind of spirals, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. False positives are the enemy. My running joke with my CFO is, I can get rid of all of your fraud, but you're not going to have any revenue. So no fraud means no transactions, most likely. So it's a balance. You really have to figure out what cost is there that's acceptable. And the better you can automate the reaction for the customer and keep them on the road, they're more tolerant of it. Most people understand they don't want to deal with a fraud. They don't want to deal with filing a dispute. Even if it's easy, they don't want to deal with that. And so most customers are generally tolerant of some false positives as long as you give them an easy way out and they're not sitting at a gas station for 2 hours trying to solve the problem.
Right, exactly. Let's go to the next slide and look at kind of how traditional systems operate versus AI and machine learning models. And I know that you've provided us some of those examples, Will, but feel free to expand on any of these. But what I'm really wondering is, what do the outcomes look like for a fleet, that uses a fuel card provider using AI and machine learning versus, a traditional system or a system that doesn't use that advanced technology?
Yeah, the two most important outcomes I think, based on what we hear from our customers, the two most important outcomes are less fraud losses. So reduce my fraud and keep me out of the false positive loop. Again, we hear that very consistently. It's interesting. I was at a conference not too long ago for larger fleets and over the road fleets. And I asked just really candidly to the group, how many good transactions would you be okay with me stopping to stop one bad transaction? So what's the ratio that you're comfortable with? And the first person to raise their hand said 10. You can stop 10 good transactions for every one bad transaction. And so I said, how many have you had fraud happen on you? Absolutely. Yeah, we had this big thing and it cost us a bunch of money. And then right behind that person, somebody said 1. Like, you can stop one bad one on one good one. And they haven't had fraud. And so the perspective of the customer is so important. If someone's never dealt with fraud, it doesn't feel real to them. But as soon as they get that bill that has an extra $5,000 on it or $10,000 that they're not expecting, and that fear builds, and can I pay this? And what happened? Folks that have experienced that are far more tolerant of a false positive or declining a transaction. That their position is, at all costs, keep fraud out of my account. And so, again, what machine learning and AI allows us to do is deploy those on the pre-auth, which is really important for the customers, so we can decline fraud, keep good customers on the road. But we deploy machine learning after the fact, and we take every false positive and say, why was this a false positive? How should this feature have been interpreted? And so the machine learning models help us there. We also put the inverse of that through a machine learning model. So here's all the fraud we missed. What features could have predicted that? And how could we have predicted that better? Again, reduce fraud losses, reduce false positives. You're never going to get to 100-0. Like, that's the dream, capture 100% of fraud, 0 false positives. Yeah. But you want to strike that. You want to be in that high double-digit or low double-digit false positives, high 90s capture. Like, that's the dream, is to live in that space. And machine learning is really allowing us to get much closer to that. Binary fraud rules, if you were 50-50 a couple of years ago, that was really good. And that's just not tolerable in the market today.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is really interesting is how much more effective these systems are. So, we have a number on the slide here that if you're using that AI machine learning model, that's 32% more fraudulent transactions that are being stopped and a 25% reduction in fraud losses. And so, when you think about 25% reduction compared to traditional systems, and you go back and think about all of that money that you can lose to fraud, that's huge. That's a huge improvement over the model that has been in place forever up until now, right?
That's exactly right. And something that a lot of folks don't think about when you're just seeing dollars, for folks and business owners on the call, or folks that are responsible for P&L, that one fraud dollar drops straight to the bottom line. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. If you think about having to offset the cost of fraud, if you're at a 20% margin business, you got to have $5 in revenue to offset that single dollar in fraud. So now multiply that times however many, Cecile went through the stats. That's tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue just to get back to 0. And so, yeah, that 25% can make a huge difference in the end of year and the P&L and the profitability of an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go to the next slide and let's just talk about what this looks like in real life. Like, how is WEX using AI and machine learning to prevent fraud? And Will, I might pick on you here again.
Yeah. Again, we're using the machine learning models. We've got that deployed in our transaction space. Again, the other two really primary threat vectors are account takeover. So we look at account access. We have several machine learning models and detection capabilities deployed in our account takeover space. So when you log into your account, we're evaluating that. App fraud, another huge place that we see fraudsters attacking. That's really around business identity theft, stealing business identities. And so when someone comes into our environment trying to apply for an account, we deploy several machine learning and AI capabilities, both internal and external, against that process. The other place, and really one of the new places that we've deployed machine learning and AI capabilities, is in our call center. And so it's amazing when you go listen to the voices that are used in our call center. They sound so authentic. They sound very human, very authentic. Even the accents to the area that they should be calling from are authentic. And so we have a technology deployed there to detect synthetic voices, synthetic phone lines. And it's made a tremendous difference. We're seeing about a 20% reduction in account takeover attempts in our call center because of that. So we're really thinking about all of the entry points that fraudsters can get into the environment and affect our customers, and finding AI and machine learning solutions to deploy against that.
Yeah, I think what you guys are doing is incredible. And I want to kind of talk about, and we can go to the next slide here, how is that different than what other companies are doing, like fuel card providers and software? Like, what are you guys doing differently than others?
I can take on that one. I think the biggest thing that we have, I think there's a lot of things that we have already mentioned, but if you think about on the machine learning and the volume of transactions, but if you think about this, it's like WEX is the biggest fuel card in North America. Therefore, we have the highest volume. The more volume we have, the smarter our models are. So we're not just creating tools. We're really like partnering it up, and like partnering it up, when I mean partnering it up, with like sharing their expertise that WEX has built over 40 years. So we have 40 years of transaction data coming through, training our models. That's one of the aspects that we have here. The other thing was not just throwing like the bucket and be like, hey, here's a whole bunch of tools, figure it out, where is fraud or not. Like, we're trying to get those actions. And like also, like we always mention, is like balancing that friction with also protecting the customer, because we can create a whole bunch of friction for like drivers anytime they're going to fuel, and that will help reduce fraud. But we also want to make the experience as seamless as possible while still protecting the customer. So only communicating with the fleets when we're like, hey, we have done our best with our fraud models, our intelligence, and now we have these high risk transactions. We want to get your input. Let us know when we have that feedback loop. The other thing that we have with if you think about, it's not just the time. We have built the relationships with the old partners. So and when I say that is, we have our own network. So WEX is the only field dedicated network. And if you compare that to for example, open loop network, which I would say like is like the MasterCard and Visa or any kind of card like that is more for retail, we have a specialized network that is dedicated to fuel. And that actually, and like I said, and we have the partnership with the old partner. So we have created the specifications. What that means, anytime that card is swiped, we're gathering, we call it level 3 data, which is all the itemized data for the transaction. So we can even stop, like Cecilia was talking about earlier, if your fuel controls are correctly, we can stop the C-store purchase. So if the driver says, hey, I'm gonna fuel my car and I'm gonna buy a couple of cigarettes, we can stop that at the C-store. That's something that puts us apart because of our network. Like I said, we have the relationship with the old partners. We have the network. We do all the processing and issuing. So we have all the details that go there. And the other thing that, like Cecile talking about earlier about AI insights that we're doing as well differently, is like we not only have the data, and now we're trying to fit it in a smart way that people do not have to like, oh, let me look at, like I think Fran mentioned earlier, like the exception report. Now with the AI insights tool that we're in beta right now, we will be able to highlight that up there. So you don't have to go and like, oh, let me go to the Excel spreadsheet, go through 500 transactions. It's like, nope. here's 3 transactions that lose suspicion, and here's why now you can take your action. So that's what we call it the insight. So it's not just lots of data, it's like now make it actionable for the customer. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I say like the biggest thing is like we've mentioned in the past earlier in like a lot of the discussion is like it's really about how do we partner with the fleet manager. And when I say that is like it has to be like a partnership in the sense of like the fleet manager has to do all the measures to protect, or the company need to do all the measures to protect, for example, that we don't open the front door and people take over the accounts. That's step 1. Step 2 is like also like setting the fraud controls. All those things is a partnership. If these are taken care of, we're going to help it reduce fraud a lot, like a higher scale, almost to like, we can never say zero, but we can work together to stop fraud and defeat the bad actors. Because like we all said, like where there is money to be made, they're going to look for it. So
Yeah,
I would say are going to be different.
Yeah, and I think, that what you said about closed loop versus open loop, that might sound like a, technical credit card thing, but really what it is like you said, it gives the fleet manager that control over what they can purchase. And so, on the slide here, we have all those different ways that they can take control and, limit purchases, or like Cecile said early on, control usage times, only 8 to 5 or only weekdays, and set spending limits so that, nobody can make crazy large charges. And that's a huge difference between a fuel card and just a regular like Visa or MasterCard. Let's go to the next slide and let's talk about secure fuel with Geotab. I know this is something exciting you guys have coming up. So Sebastian, how is secure fuel a major advancement for mobility fleets?
I can take on this one. So this one, so secure fuel, just for context, we've had it on the OTR space on over the road. And one of the reasons was because in over the road, telematics devices have been mandatory for a while already. Now in the mobility space, they're not mandatory, but we have seen a big adoption on telematics devices. And when we talk to customers, everybody just wants more control. And we already have great control capabilities. But one of the exciting things, and actually this is one of the things that gets me super excited, is about how do we start matching telematics, or call it vehicle intelligence, with transaction data. And it's really about enhancing even what we have to there further, because now, like we always say, we have these whole machine learning models, AI, but now we can bring the vehicle data to say, for example, the vehicle is at location A, and they're trying to fill at location B. And let's say they're trying to fill in South Texas, and all of a sudden, they swipe the car in South Texas, and we look at the working vehicle, like, wait, that vehicle is not South Texas. They might be North Texas right now. They seem to be 50 miles away. Then we can say, okay, decline that transaction. So it becomes more, it's proactive instead of reactive. And now we have that enhanced data. So we can decline that transaction because we're seeing the vehicle location. Also, like Cecile was mentioning earlier, when you talk about driver misuse, it can start really helping with that. Because like I said, like it might be, oh, I'm going to take the car, I'm going to fill my vehicle. So I go drive my car to the gas station, leave the working vehicle behind. Now we're going to detect that stuff as well. So it's really about matching those two things together. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, of course, talking to customers is like, we know that not all customers are the same. So they may be customers that are doing last mile delivery, where they like all their expenses are around fuel. They are really critical about keeping those expenses down. And they might say, I just want to decline any transaction that we believe could be driver misuse or anything geolocation based. We'll decline it, and they'll have, and it is not just like we decline it, call it done. We'll decline it, we'll communicate to the fleet manager, and the fleet manager will be able to override that. And on the other side, you may have, for example, the trade company that they're like, hey, our invoice is $300-400 per hour. I cannot wait 15 minutes waiting for a fleet manager to approve a transaction. So in those cases, for example, you can set up your spend controls to say, you know what, authorize the transactions, but let me know if something is suspicious and I can follow up after the fact. So it's not going to be like it's kind of an exception, but with the insights, we'll like pop it up as an insight, like, hey, why this transaction was approved, even though the vehicle was not there. Take a peek. It might be because they were fueling something else. Like sometimes they have to put fuel on a lawnmower or something along the lines, or a canister or something. So it might be a valid transaction, but again, it's about like providing that control to the fleet manager. And we're starting with GeoTap. We're now on pilot, so super exciting. We're seeing already this. We have a few fleets already testing this. And then we're looking about expanding beyond GeoTap to other telematics providers like Samsara, Motive, Asuga, Verizon Connect. And we're going and expanding this as we go. But yeah, it's going to be game changer. I believe it's going to be changing for both third-party fraud and first-party fraud.
Yeah, certainly it will be. Will, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the dream of 100% capture rate and 0% fraud rate on the OTR side, where we've been using Secure Fuel for quite some time. We're close. The fraud rate when a fleet uses decline with Secure Fuel is almost 0%. It's such a powerful tool. And then when you grab all of those data analytics or all those telematics to pipe into the analytics engines that drive our features. Look, data is the value prop pretty much everywhere, but certainly in fraud detection. The more data I have, the more accurate I can be and the more fraud I can capture. So when you start throwing in vehicle location, tank levels, velocity, that's just more features that I can build to improve capture rate and decrease false positive rate. So if you're not using it, Secure Fuel is the solution if you want to get rid of fraud in your environment.
Thank you so much. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I want to be sure to get to the Q&A section. So we're going to just go ahead and flip to that. And let's see, we've got some great questions coming in. I love this. So the first one is, how can WEX help fleets stop fraud prior to a transaction taking place at a retail station? We do like the exception reporting, but we want real-time action to stop fraud before it takes place.
Yeah, I'll take that one. That's our real-time transaction monitoring, powered both by binary fraud rules and the multiple machine learning models. So as soon as the card's swiped or a pump's activated, during that, I think I get 50 milliseconds or something to make a decision based on the point of sale system. So as soon as that card swipes, during that 50 milliseconds of time that it takes to approve, one of the actions is that transaction runs through the fraud model and we create a predictability of fraud score. And we will just decline that transaction if it meets a certain probability value, or if it meets a probability value and hits a binary rule. And so we're using that to decline fraud or high likelihood of fraud in real time. And then the other side of that is the alert automation. So if we do decline it, it's not legitimate, we can get you back on the road just by adjudicating that alert in the web portal. Either a fleet manager or driver, however your account has it set up. So yeah, we are very focused on preventing the transaction from occurring using those machine learning models and our binary rules.
Perfect. I love this next question that just came in. So what is WEX doing to get correct grade on the sale, like premium versus diesel versus E15, et cetera?
Yeah, I'm happy to maybe talk a little bit about what we're doing to help identify those opportunities for fleet managers. So I mentioned before that we have an innovative insights tool in beta right now, which is just a product geeky term for what you do after your pilot, before you go to general availability, with a number of customers, and we're basically ingesting their data, and then we're using AI to mine those opportunities for premium fuel, and then creating alerts and automation around it, so that, for example, we can identify that there's premium fuel happening with, let's call it 10 of your drivers, and we can prompt an opportunity for you to then, email or text those drivers and say, hey, just a reminder, don't use premium fuel, or to deactivate those cards. And so there's a number of things we're doing there that is post-transaction, but if we can, again, help you automate behavior reinforcement or blocking the card if needed, that can help us get there. Frank, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add from your experiences here, or Will and Sebastian.
Yeah, well, I do want to circle back to some points that Seb was making earlier regarding open and closed loop. And I think that that's a really important differentiator in the industry. Sebastian did a great job of providing an overview, but I just wanted to get a tiny bit more granular and give some fleet managers on this call maybe some tools to correct some behavior that could be occurring now on an open loop product. So not to get too specific, but when you run an open loop product, MasterCard, Visa, that runs on merchant category codes, MCCs, those are 4 digits. When you run a closed loop product like the WEX solution, it runs on NACS codes, National Association of Convenience Stores. Those are 6 digits. So WEX can control what is actually being transacted in the wild. And that's really important, especially when we analyze transaction files from an open loop product. And anyone on the call right now can actually pull, say, October's transactions from your drivers. And if you sort by product description, you're going to see a variety of products that are being purchased in the wild. I would specifically ask that you look for things like miscellaneous, other, or general merchandise. In an open loop solution, we're seeing somewhere between 10 and 20% of overall transactions falling into that miscellaneous category. And that's an interesting one because you can do a quick analysis across the line item to see what was the amount spent and how many units were purchased, and look for things like 1 unit, $8. That's not fuel. That's a C-store transaction that your MasterCard's not locking out. And I think that that's an easy way to audit whether you've got first-party fraud happening, whether your drivers are misusing the card in the wild. And if you'd like to talk to somebody about a closed-loop solution, please reach out to WEX.
That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that additional info. Okay, let's see. I know we are out of time, but anybody who's willing to stay on, I'd like to get to just maybe 2 more questions in our Q&A because they're so good. So the next one is secure fuel option just with Geotab, or will it be available in the future with other telematics companies? Good question.
So it will start with Geotab, like that's the pilot that we're doing right now, but we will be expanding to other telematic devices. It will be great, honestly, like I'm in products, so we'd love to hear what telematics devices people are using. So also feel free to reach to Frank or WEX, and we are gathering feedback right now. But the things that we have heard so far in the industry are Samsara, the ones that we're hearing, the Asugas of the world, Motive. We've heard about Power Fleet. So there's a few ones that we're prioritizing, and we will be adding them as we go. And like, to be honest, we're prioritizing based on customer requests and volume. So we'll be adding more. So it's not just Geotab.
Oh, that's great. So more to come.
More to come, yes.
Love that. Yeah. This next one is something I feel like I should know the answer to, but I've always wondered. What can fleet drivers look for to watch out for card skimmers at fuel pumps?
Not to be doomsday, but you're going to need superhero vision nowadays to X-ray vision to really see it. I mean, but back again, olden days, a little bit longer than a couple of years, but stations have really gotten good at the security tape on the pumps and checking their pumps because it is such a huge problem. Anything, I'd probably show my age a little bit. When I used to go to the doctor's office, you get those highlight magazines and you had to find the things in the magazine in the picture that looked out of place. It's a little bit of that game. Like, what doesn't look right here, and trust your instincts. We did a session with the Texas law enforcement agency, and they brought some of the skimmers. One of the most impressive ones that I saw was the fraudsters had 3D printed the entire face of the pump and put the skimmer in it. And so, think about the face of the pump being a couple of feet by a foot, and then they just stuck it completely over the existing face, and it was utterly undetectable. There's just, I guess you could pull on it and it stuck out a little bit, but technology is just enabled, and everything's so small now, like cameras. One of the things I typically look for, especially if I have to put a pin in, is a little hole over the pin pad, because they'll stick little tiny cameras in there to watch your pin. So something like that. If anything's out of place, something's not level, I typically look for that stuff. I tap to pay. That's with my personal cards. I use tap to pay. That's somewhat better, although there is some theory that they've compromised tap to pay now. They're figured out how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's not a great answer. It's very, very, very difficult to see because they've gotten so good at replicating those pump faces, and the technology is so tiny now. They don't even have to go back in. They're disposable. Used to, probably running on a little bit, but used to the skimmer device was so expensive, the bad guys would go retrieve them, and so you had some opportunity. They had to get in there a couple of times. Now they cost a couple of bucks to make, or they can buy them online for $5 or $6, and so they just leave them. And so, smaller, disposable, commoditized. Yeah, trust your gut, I guess. Look for anything out of place and trust your gut.
Yeah, I've been wondering, like, how long will it take before tap to pay has the same issues? But I guess, I mean, that just emphasizes how important it is to have controls in place to catch things right away that look fraudulent.
Yep.
So our last question, I love this question. I think this was so smart to submit to whoever did it. Basically, they're just asking, what your advice is to, like, what's your best advice to prevent fraudulent transactions and basically not lose all that money. That's my own edit there. So could we just go around quickly and tell us what your advice for a fleet manager on the webinar would be? Do we want to start with you, Sebastian?
Oh, you got me thinking about that one. Give me 2 seconds on that one.
Okay, I'll move on to Will. I'm just going in order on the screen here.
Yeah. This is probably a little broader than just transaction fraud. I would say one of the mistakes that I see is trusting a fraud team to manage all of your fraud. Fraud is an enterprise problem, no matter what industry you're in, and make it an enterprise problem, make it an enterprise priority. Everybody's responsible for preventing fraud. Product development, your drivers, your fleet managers, your marketing people, your salespeople, everybody should be thinking about how to protect the organization from fraud, because the team that's responsible for catching it, if it's all on them, you're going to have real problems, because you need a culture in the organization that thinks about fraud and security, which starts at the top. If you're a business owner, a senior leader, you set that tone for your organization, and it's really your responsibility and our responsibility to do that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Cecile? Oh, you're ready, Sebastian?
I think I'm ready. Sorry, I got
all right.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I totally picked on you as the first person. So
no, good,
go ahead.
I would say, I think going to what in the opposite spectrum of what we just mentioned, it's about, in my head, the other thing that can be done is managing your tools, providing as much data as possible. And when I say that, is like using the drivers like this. Like if you have multiple drivers, just keep that up to date. So keep the system up to date, the spend controls on everything like that. Because we can have all the technology and tools all day long, but if they're not configured correctly or the data is up to date, there's not much our systems can do if those are not up to date. And when I say that is, for example, we've seen sometimes fleets that they share driver's IDs. So that I've seen cars that have the driver ID key on the car. Is like, well, now guess what? We're not going to know who was the person fueling that. So again, just try to manage, like, even though we have policies, try to stick to them, try to keep the system updated and use it correctly, because it sounds like we're asking, for example, for driver ID for the sake of it, but it's really about protecting the fleet. So like, use the system as is intended. I would say that's a key thing for us to help you guys as well do a better job.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
1, 2, 3, 4 is not a valid password or PIN number for a card. Neither is 4, 5, 6, 7. Randomize.
Good advice there. Cecile, let's hear your
Sure.
advice.
I'm going to add on to what Sebastian was saying. Use technology. It is your friend. It will help you to best prevent fraud. And there are plenty of partners and providers out there who can help you do that. Pick a fuel card provider that you trust, that is transparent, that leans into security, that is innovating in technology and AI to help make your life better. Those are the things you want to look for.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's one thing that we've learned throughout this webinar, it's that AI and machine learning powered models are a huge difference maker, like game changing. So I love that. All right, Frank, last but not least, what's your advice?
Yeah, I'll build on what Cecile said a bit. I think it's important that companies choose their providers wisely. I think sometimes a fuel card, a credit card can be thought of as a commodity, a transactional nature. A vendor can provide it for us. Look for a partner. And Cecile talked about that, providing, that partnership, a company that wants to grow with your company, wants to provide technology and security and is available for you. I think picking the right provider, similarly to how we choose our own, relationships in life, mortgage, credit card. We're not just changing cards every month, whoever gives us the lowest rate or the most discounts or the most points. We're looking for long-term relationships and to be with a company that we trust and that we can communicate with. And so that's what I would tell fleet managers, procurement directors, CFOs.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there where, some providers might offer discounts, but I think it would be good to look at, how much do those add up to, but then also how much does, users of AI and machine learning, how much can they really save you in the long run from preventing that fraud in the first place? And so kind of thinking about what that opportunity cost there would be versus, a small discount or something like that. Would you guys agree?
That's so true. Yeah, it's really about total value.
Right.
If you're spending 20% more because your drivers are misusing the product out in the field and they're buying things in the C-store that aren't part of your driver policy and aren't permitted, but you're getting a little bit of a discount or a rebate, the misuse is outpacing the savings, and you need to look at both combined for total value.
Yeah, agreed. And thank you for putting that much more eloquently than I did.
No, you teed it up perfectly, Shelley. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, unfortunately, it's time to wrap. And I just want to thank all four of you for sharing so many insights with us. This has been so informative. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for sticking around and submitting great questions. If your question wasn't answered, and I know there are a few out there, we're going to follow up with you individually via email with a response. So we're not going to leave you behind. And we just really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. Again, thank you to Cecile, Will, Sebastian, Frank, and Wex for today's presentation. And if you want to replay this, take a look back or share it with somebody. The webinar will be available on demand on the Automotive Fleet website at automotivefleet.com/webinars. Again, that's automotivefleet.com/webinars. And on behalf of the entire team here at Bobbit and Automotive Fleet, I want to just thank everybody for joining us. We hope to see you again for another Automotive Fleet webinar. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you.